All right. Welcome in, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely always up for a good mystery.
Well, get ready because this one's a real head scratcher.
Ooh, lay it on me.
We're looking into a case. It all started with a YouTube video, actually, about this article titled "Family Sins."
Family sense. It already sounds juicy. What's the gist?
So it's about this death, right? And no one can figure out, was it a murder planned out, cold-blooded, or was it, just a horrible accident, but with a really, really messed up backstory?
I'm intrigued. Let's hear the details.
Okay, so picture this. New Year's Day, 2021, Solana Beach, California. Beautiful, right?
Sounds idyllic.
Yeah, well, not so much for Tom Merriman.
Who's Tom Merriman?
He was a 64-year-old butterfly expert. Love those butterflies.
Okay, and what happened to him?
They found his body on New Year's Day.
Oh, that's awful. What happened?
Well, that's where things get strange. They found him under a pile of trash in his driveway.
In his driveway, under trash. That's not your typical New Year's Day discovery.
No, not at all. And that's why the police were like, something's fishy here.
I can see why.
Yeah.
So, who becomes the prime suspect in this less than festive scene?
His stepdaughter, Jade Janks, 37 years old at the time.
The stepdaughter, huh? That always adds another layer, doesn't
It
it?
really does. And here's the thing. Jade and Tom, they were close. Like, really close. She was the one taking care of him, cooking his meals, the whole 9 yards.
So not your stereotypical distant, estranged family situation then.
Nope, not at all. And that's why everyone was so shocked when things, well, took this dark turn.
I bet. So what was the turning point? What flipped this whole thing on its head?
Buckle up, because this is where it gets wild. While Tom's in the hospital, Jade finds something on his computer.
Ooh, what'd she find? Some incriminating evidence.
You could say that. She found nude photos of herself.
Whoa. Okay, yeah, that's definitely a game changer. Talk about a violation.
Right. I mean, imagine finding something like that. The betrayal, the fear, it must have been overwhelming.
Absolutely. I can only imagine the emotional whirlwind that would unleash.
So that discovery is obviously huge, right? And then the investigation starts digging, and they find two main pieces of evidence.
Okay, I'm all ears. What'd they find?
First, they talk to Jade's friend, Adam Zipak. And Adam claims that Jade confessed to him. She told him she drugged Tom, suffocated him, and then strangled him.
Wow, a full-blown confession. That seems pretty damning.
It does, right, except there's a catch. Adam's story is, well, it's full of holes.
Such as?
For starters, he admitted he never actually saw Tom's body.
That's odd. You'd think if your friend confessed to murder, you might, want to check if they were serious.
Right, it all just seemed a little too convenient, a little too rehearsed.
So the confession is shaky at best. What about the second piece of evidence?
This is where things get even more interesting. The forensics team finished the autopsy, and their conclusion, Tom died from an overdose of Ambien.
Ambien, like the sleeping pill.
The one and only. And that completely contradicted the whole strangulation story.
Yeah, I can see how that throws a wrench in things. So now the big question is, was this a planned murder fueled by anger and betrayal, or was it a tragic accident, maybe even a suicide, followed by a panicked cover-up?
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not clear-cut at all. We've got this potential motive, this intense feeling of violation, but then the cause of death doesn't quite line up with the supposed confession.
Yeah, it's a real puzzle. So where do we go from here? What other pieces of information are we going to uncover to try and make sense of this whole mess?
Well, that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
So we ended part 1 on a real cliffhanger.
We did. But don't worry, we've got more twists and turns to come.
Okay, good, because I'm hooked. Hit me with the next piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so remember how Jade found those photos while Tom was in the hospital?
Well, the thing is, she didn't just, abandon him after that.
She didn't. But I thought that's where the motive for murder came in. You'd think so, right? But get this, she actually continued to care for him. She brought him meals at the hospital, helped him get back on his feet at home.
Wait, really? That's kind of the opposite of what you'd expect from someone who allegedly wanted him dead.
I know, right? It's almost like she was trying to make amends or something, even after that huge violation.
So what are we supposed to make of that? Was it genuine care or just a clever act to throw off suspicion?
That's the million-dollar question. It's almost like she was experiencing these conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, but maybe also some lingering affection or a sense of duty.
Yeah, human emotions are messy, aren't they? It's not always black and white, especially in family situations.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so intriguing. It forces us to consider the complexities of human behavior and how sometimes even the most heinous acts can be driven by a mix of motives.
And sometimes those motives are buried so deep, even the person acting might not fully understand them.
So moving on, we have to talk about the digital footprint aspect of this case. Those photos on Tom's computer, the text messages on Jade's phone, it all becomes evidence.
Right, and this really highlights how our digital lives can have real-world consequences, especially in criminal investigations.
It's almost like a cautionary tale for all of us, you know? Be careful what you do online because it can come back to haunt you.
Absolutely. But it also raises questions about privacy and the ethics of using personal data as evidence. It's a whole other discussion, really.
Definitely. But for now, let's stick with the case at hand. So we've got this confusing picture. A suspicious death, a questionable confession, conflicting evidence, and a jury tasked with sorting it all out.
So what happened? Did they reach a verdict? Did they find Jade guilty or innocent?
Well, that's where the article gets really interesting. It doesn't actually tell us.
Wait, what? It just leaves us hanging.
It does. And honestly, I think it's brilliant
Brilliant. How so?
because it forces us, the readers, to become the jury. We've been given all the information, and now it's up to us to weigh the evidence, consider the arguments, and decide for ourselves what we believe happened.
It's like an interactive true crime experience.
Exactly. It really engages you on a deeper level. So put on your juror hat for a second. If you were on that jury, what would you be focusing on?
For me, it would all come down to reasonable doubt. Did the prosecution present enough convincing evidence to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Jade was guilty of murder? Or were there enough inconsistencies, enough unanswered questions to justify a not guilty verdict?
Because remember, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They have to make the case airtight.
Right, and with a case like this built largely on circumstantial evidence, it's a tall order.
It is. It is. Especially when you consider the emotional weight of this case. A family torn apart, a life lost, and the possibility of a young woman spending years, maybe even decades, behind bars.
It's heavy stuff. And it really underscores the importance of a fair and impartial justice system, one that takes into account all the evidence, all the perspectives, and doesn't rush to judgment.
So, even though we don't have a definitive answer, even though the article leaves us with some unanswered questions, I think that's part of the point. It's not about finding the right answer, but about engaging in the process of critical thinking, of wrestling with moral dilemmas, and of acknowledging the complexity of human nature.
I agree. And sometimes those open endings, those unanswered questions, are the ones that stick with you the longest. They spark conversations, they challenge your beliefs, and they make you think about the world in a new light.
It's like that saying, the best stories are the ones that leave you wanting more.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And in this case, I think what we're left wanting is a deeper understanding of ourselves, of our own capacity for both good and evil, and of the intricate web of relationships that connect us all.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes those unanswered questions just, they kind of get under your skin.
Yeah, they stick with you, don't they?
And in this case, there's just so much to think about. Like, okay, first, you've got this whole betrayal thing happening within a family.
Right, right.
And then on top of that, you start realizing how much, like, our digital lives actually count.
Oh, yeah, the evidence, the texts, all that.
And I know, it just makes you wonder about justice, too. You know, like, what does it even mean in a situation like this?
It's complicated for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not always about, just punishment or guilt versus innocence.
So as we kind of wrap up this whole deep dive into family sins, what do you think is like the biggest takeaway? What's the one thing our listeners should really like walk away pondering?
Well, for me, it's got to be staying curious. We've looked at all this evidence, the different arguments, tried to figure out motives, but we're still left with this open ending.
Right, and the article never says what the verdict was.
And I think that's on purpose.
Right.
It's like it's telling us, hey, here's all the info. Now go and use your brains. Don't settle for easy answers.
Think for yourselves.
Exactly. And that's why this whole deep dive is so cool. It's not about giving you all the answers.
Yeah.
It's about turning you into the investigator.
So before we go, any advice for our listeners? Like, how should they approach this case or even other true crime stuff they come across?
Good question. I'd say don't be afraid of the unknowns. Those loose ends, those unanswered questions. Embrace them. Let them make you more curious, push you to dig deeper.
Like, don't get hung up on needing a perfect answer.
Right. It's about the journey, the process of figuring things out.
Yeah,
And sometimes the most interesting stuff is in the gray areas where things aren't so black and white.
I like that. Embracing the ambiguity. It reminds us that, learning is an ongoing thing.
Totally. It's not always about the destination, but about how you get there. And sometimes the most rewarding paths are the ones that, take you off the beaten track.
Well said. Well said. So, to everyone out there listening, thanks for joining us on this wild ride into family sins.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We hope you've enjoyed it. And most importantly, we hope you'll keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those deep dives going.
Keep that curiosity alive.
Until next time, everyone, stay curious.